Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are wrestling with one of the most fundamental and frankly terrifying paradoxes of human existence.
Which is?
The fact that our species, a species capable of the highest intelligence, we can create these sublime works of art, engineer astonishing technologies, master the laws of physics,
Right.
is so often tainted by what our source material calls an underlying collective madness.
Mhm.
It's this exploration of why we can be so incredibly clever, yet consistently fail at the simple foundational task of just being peaceful, present, and, well, kind to ourselves and each other.
That paradox is the perfect starting point for this deep dive. We are analyzing a stack of materials centered entirely on the transformation of consciousness, specifically drawing from the profound insights of Eckhart Tolle's work in A New Earth.
Okay.
Our mission here is systematic, but it's also intensely practical.
Yeah.
We need to unpack three core interlinked concepts.
What are...
The structure of the ego, the mechanism of suffering, which he gives a name, the pain body, and then we need to clearly delineate the accessible path to what he calls presence or awakening.
So this isn't just theory then. This is about giving you, the listener, actual tools.
Exactly. This is about moving beyond just an intellectual understanding of humanity's inherited dysfunction and recognizing the immediate path of inner transformation that is available to all of us right now.
A manual for self-observation.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
And to make these incredibly dense, almost abstract concepts concrete for you, we're going to use the powerful philosophical contrasts and surprising historical and modern anecdotes that are embedded right within the sources.
We'll be talking about figures like Jesus and Buddha, comparing the foundational error of Descartes with the much later profound realization of Sartre.
And looking at modern examples of surrender, like the life of Stephen Hawking or the simplicity of a Zen master, it's a journey from the deepest historical darkness to the light of personal clarity.
So let's unpack this, beginning with a diagnosis.
Okay, so let's start with a brutal, almost clinical assessment of the human condition, as presented in the source material.
If humanity's history were condensed into a single psychological case file, the diagnosis would be stunning.
And what would that diagnosis be?
Chronic paranoid delusions, combined with a pathological propensity to commit murder and acts of extreme violence.
It really requires a shocking kind of external perspective to grasp this, doesn't it?
It does.
To look at our collective history not as a story of progress, but as a long, continuous tragedy.
Yes, and the source lays out human history, particularly the 20th century, as the clearest, most recent evidence of this collective insanity.
And it's a dysfunction that actually intensified and accelerated as human intelligence grew.
That acceleration is the key paradox. Intelligence, which should lead to greater wisdom and harmony, was instead, well, it was entirely enlisted in the service of madness.
Right.
The source reminds us that by 1914, human intelligence had perfected sophisticated machinery, yes, but also machine guns, bombs, submarines, and poison gas.
Our ingenuity was weaponized against ourselves.
Precisely. And the toll is just staggering, forcing us to reckon with this concept of an inherited human dysfunction.
So we have to consider the raw numbers.
We have to. The sources cite that by the end of the 20th century, over 100 million people had died a violent death at the hands of their fellow humans.
Wow.
And this wasn't just, conventional warfare. This was mass exterminations and systematic genocide, demonstrating a chilling internal logic.
And you're talking about things like Stalin's purges.
Millions of class enemies murdered under Stalin, the Holocaust, where industrialized efficiency was literally applied to mass murder, or the atrocities of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia.
Where a quarter of the country's population was killed in the name of an ideology.
It is the definition of collective madness, a thought form gone totally malignant.
And crucially, this madness isn't solely reserved for human-on-human violence. The source emphasizes that the dysfunction extends outward, right?
Absolutely. It extends to unprecedented violence against other life forms and the planet itself.
It's the same underlying ignorance, then.
It's the same ignorance of connectedness that drives the destruction of oxygen-producing forests, the massive scale of ill treatment of animals in factory farms, the poisoning of our oceans and air.
And this is all driven by what?
By the egoic mind's greed and its blind compulsion to consume, rooted in the foundational belief that we are separate from everything else. It's the inability to recognize the life in the other, whether that other is a person, an animal, or a forest.
If you look at this clinically, the history points to an unrelenting projection of unconsciousness outward onto perceived enemies. So where does the light begin to break through this chronic darkness?
The one brief, lucid interval in this tragic case file is perhaps the dawn of sanity.
Which is?
The very recognition of this dysfunction. The greatest achievement of humanity is not the wheel or the microchip, but realizing that we are collectively mad.
And that recognition, the sources tell us, first came through a few rare individuals in the distant past who truly saw the human condition for what it was.
The primary examples cited are Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, who saw the dysfunction with absolute clarity 2,600 years ago, and around the same time in China, Lao Tzu.
Who left the Tao Te Ching.
Yes, that powerful record of his teaching. And their essential message was deceptively simple. Look closely at how you live. Observe the unnecessary suffering you create.
So they were pointing to the possibility of awakening from this collective nightmare of normal human existence, which they saw as, well, as afflicted.
Exactly. But here's where the tragic irony enters, because the source notes how quickly these simple, powerful teachings were distorted.
Right. If the message was sanity, how did the path to sanity get twisted back into becoming a source of madness?
They became ideologies.
Ah.
Once written down, interpreted, and institutionalized, these simple, direct paths to inner peace became complex thought forms, dogmas, and belief systems that people could use for identification.
And identification with a thought form is, by definition, the beginning of the ego.
Precisely. Institutionalized religions, instead of fulfilling their potential as unifying forces that reveal the fundamental oneness of all life, became profoundly divisive.
So people identified with these belief systems, these conceptual forms.
To enhance their false sense of self.
Yeah.
They used religion, history, and theology to make themselves right and others wrong, thus defining their identity through opposition.
Through their enemies. The non-believers they often felt justified in killing or converting.
Man made God in his own image, an eternal, infinite, unnameable truth reduced to a mental idol. My God, or our God.
That's the ego operating at a collective, global scale.
It is. It takes the form of righteous fervor. The source notes that even though the truth still shines dimly at the core of these religions, it often requires a glimpse of that truth within oneself, a moment of presence, to perceive it at all.
Because the form, the ritual, the building, the scripture has become so thick that it obscures the essence.
Yes, but we are witnessing a profound modern shift. The source points to a large-scale spiritual opening arising outside of traditional institutionalized religious structures.
I think this is fascinating because it means the transformation is happening at the level of the individual, not the institution.
It's a spontaneous recognition of the inherent dysfunction. This new spirituality emphasizes that true spirituality is not defined by what you believe, dogma, doctrine, or form.
But by your state of consciousness.
Yes, by how you act and interact in the world moment to moment.
That's a crucial distinction. It doesn't matter if you claim to follow a path or subscribe to a moral code if your actions are still driven by egoic separation, judgment, or fear.
But this influx of consciousness meets a powerful resistance, doesn't it?
It does. The source posits that this awakening is being met by an intensification and entrenchment of the collective ego.
The collective ego will not go quietly. In response to the wave of new consciousness, many institutions, not just religious but political and cultural, will harden their doctrinal positions.
They become closed, rigid.
Collective egoic entities, intensely identified with their mental positions, just like a desperate individual ego defends its sense of self. They use these man-made structures to fight back against the influx of formless consciousness.
So the tension is palpable.
A large-scale awakening versus a desperate collective egoic defense that refuses to yield its identity.
That sets the stage for the global issue. Now we need to drill down from the collective madness to the individual structure that creates it. If the collective dysfunction is what we see in the news, the individual experiences, it's the voice in our head. So let's unpack this fundamental question. What exactly is the ego?
The source defines the ego as fundamentally and simply identification with form.
Okay.
And the form it identifies with most strongly is the thought form, that incessant, compulsive, repetitive stream of thinking that never stops speaking in your head.
The voice that tells you who you are.
That's the one. So the moment my formless sense of beingness, the quiet sense of I am, gets mixed up with any form of thought, a belief, a memory, a possession, or a body, that's the birth of the ego.
The conceptual self.
Precisely. And this conceptual structure is universally defensive. Every ego, regardless of its content, is struggling for survival. To uphold the I thought, it desperately needs the opposite thought, the conceptual other.
It needs to define itself by what it is not.
It has to.
Yeah.
Which means the other person, the other group, the other idea is defined as most other, when the ego sees them as enemies, or at least as flawed.
And this explains the entire scale of unconscious egoic patterns, from global conflict down to the most subtle, everyday interactions.
Think about the compulsive habit of fault-finding, complaining, criticizing others. The source emphasizes this because it is so subtle and common.
We all do it.
We all engage in it. Why does finding flaws in others hold such a power over us?
The famous biblical critique. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye?
And the source provides the profound psychological answer that the Bible leaves hanging. Because when I criticize or condemn another, it instantly makes me feel bigger, superior, more aware, or more morally upright.
It's a quick, cheap hit of superiority.
Exactly. If I can prove you are wrong, then by pure conceptual logic, I must be right. That sense of superiority is the sustenance the ego craves to enhance itself.
So making yourself right and others wrong is one of the principal egoic mind patterns.
And the deep spiritual insight is that this mechanism blinds us entirely to our own internal state.
I see. It's not about the issue itself. It's about the feeling it generates in the observer. The ego is not evil. It is simply unconscious.
An error in identification. And the minute I observe that fault-finding behavior in myself, that moment of recognition, I have already stepped beyond it.
Awareness and ego cannot coexist in the same space.
The recognition of the false is simultaneously the arising of the real.
Okay, moving to the tangible world, the identification with things' possessions is probably the most visible way people define themselves. The sources detail the consumer paradox perfectly.
Modern consumer culture runs entirely on the structural flaw of the ego.
How so?
Think about the mechanism of advertising. Products are not sold based on utility alone. They are sold as identity enhancers. They promise to add something to your sense of self or how others perceive you.
Right, like designer labels.
Designer labels are expensive collective identities you buy into. If they weren't exclusive, if everyone could afford them, they would instantly lose their psychological value.
Because they wouldn't differentiate you.
Exactly. And the structural flaw here is that ego satisfaction is inherently short-lived. I buy the thing, I feel good for a day, and then the ego quickly realizes it still hasn't achieved permanence or completion.
And that's what keeps the cycle going. Constant looking, buying, consuming, wanting.
And this is where the spiritual practice of self-observation comes in. The source suggests investigating your relationship with things designated with the word my.
You need to be alert and honest about your inner narrative.
Yes. Look for the subtle emotional charge. Does possessing certain items, your car, your house, your clothes, induce a subtle feeling of importance or superiority when you compare yourself to others?
And conversely.
Does the lack of certain items induce a feeling of inferiority or shame? Most importantly, if you lose a prized possession, do you feel diminished in your sense of self, as though you've become less?
That is the ego's operation revealing itself.
The anecdote of the lost diamond ring beautifully illustrates this moment of profound self-observation.
Right. A woman is distraught because her heirloom ring was potentially stolen. Obsessed with finding the thief, her ego had totally merged with the object.
She was suffering not just from the loss of the ring, but from the fear of the loss of identity linked to the ring.
So she was prompted to look within.
And she was asked a simple, piercing question. Has who you are become diminished by the loss of this ring?
That is the moment of truth.
After minutes of quiet stillness, she stopped thinking about the external situation, the police, the thief, and tried to feel the answer rather than think it.
She tried to locate her essence without reference to the object.
And suddenly she realized her pure I amness. The formless understanding that the ring, the possession, the form, had nothing to do with her true, deep identity flooded her awareness.
It's a moment of profound internal liberation. That realization also helps one understand sayings that often seem counterintuitive, like Jesus' counsel. If someone takes your shirt, let him have your coat as well.
Because that act of letting go, when done consciously, is an act of far greater power than hanging on or defending what is conceptually yours.
It reveals the ultimate illusion, the illusion of ownership itself.
Exactly. When someone claims to own a New York skyscraper, it's a pure thought form. The conceptual thought I and the conceptual thought building merge into one story. It's a mental concept of ownership, a social fiction.
A fiction that is instantly revealed as meaningless on the deathbed when everything external falls away, the job title, the bank account, the possessions.
People often realize then that their true being was always present. obscured only by their lifelong identification with external forms, which is ultimately identification with the mind's narrative.
This leads us directly to the paradox of spiritual practices like renunciation or minimalism.
Yes, the source warns that simply giving up possessions does not automatically free you from the ego. The ego is highly adaptable.
So if you take away one kind of identification, the ego will instantly find a replacement.
It will. It might identify with a new mental image of yourself as someone who has transcended all interest in material possessions and is therefore superior, purer, or more spiritual than others.
So anti-consumerism can become just another fiercely held conceptual position.
The content changes, from designer suit to sackcloth, but the dysfunctional mind structure remains intact.
Beyond possessions, the ego identifies heavily with the physical body and social roles. First, the body is either male or female, and gender often becomes a total, rigid identity.
Forcing people into conditioned social roles that affect all aspects of their lives. And in the Western world particularly, self-worth is dangerously bound up with physical appearance. Beauty, strength, youth, fitness.
Which is a structural path to suffering. Because those attributes are impermanent, they inevitably fade.
The source gives the chilling example of anorexia, where a young woman cannot perceive her actual physical body, but only the mind's distorted concept, I am fat.
That's identification with the mind's form taken to a pathological extreme. The mind overrides the direct perception of reality.
The key to breaking this body identification is not to convince yourself you are not your body, but rather a shift in attention. We need to move attention from the external form thoughts about beautiful or ugly to the feeling of aliveness inside it.
And how do we feel that aliveness inside? What does that feel like?
It's often described as a subtle energy field, a tingling or humming sensation throughout the body. It's not the physical form anymore. It is life energy, the bridge between physical form and pure formlessness.
So when you are in touch with this alive energy field, the inner body, you are immediately anchored in the present moment.
Which is the only place outside the ego's prison. And the great paradox is that as the physical body naturally weakens with age or illness, the formless dimension, the light of consciousness, can actually shine more easily through the fading form.
And finally, we identify with social roles, our functions as worker, parent, customer, expert, patient.
And when identification with these roles is total, they turn into unconscious mandatory performances, often leading to a lack of genuine human connection.
Like the doctor who, totally identified with his professional role, cannot see the person in front of him. He only sees a case history.
Or the highly successful business leader whose entire self-worth is tied to the CEO title. Lose the title, lose the self.
The Zen master Kazan provides an excellent insight here into what it means to truly shed these roles.
Kazan was supposed to officiate at a nobleman's funeral and noticed that his palms were sweating. Later, he confessed to his disciples that he was still not ready to be a true teacher because he realized he lacked sameness of bearing before all human beings, whether beggar or king.
Wow. He was unconsciously playing a different role, a more dignified, nervous role based on the status of the nobleman.
Exactly. He was still looking at the external form and allowing it to dictate his own internal state. He wasn't truly himself. He was performing.
And the profound lesson is that the moment of recognition, seeing that you are performing, is the moment you can look through social roles and conceptual identities and see the sameness of being, the shared humanity in everyone you encounter. Okay, if the ego is the structure of misidentification, then the pain body is the mechanism that ensures that misidentification generates continuous suffering. This sounds like an incredibly intense concept. What is it, psychologically speaking?
The source defines the pain body as a semi-autonomous energy form. It is an accumulation of old, unaccepted negative emotion, the residual pain from childhood trauma, later grudges, guilt, deep-seated resentment, and accumulated suffering that resides in the energy field of the cells of the body.
A semi-autonomous energy form. That sounds less like a psychological term and more like an entity living inside us.
It is. And like any entity, its core function is survival, which means, paradoxically, it is an addiction to unhappiness.
Right. And it is vital for you, the listener, to understand this mechanical nature.
The pain body periodically needs to feed to replenish itself. And the food it requires must be energy compatible with its own low vibrational frequency. It literally thrives on negative emotional experiences.
Your own or those you provoke in others.
Correct. So how does this feeding process work, particularly when we are alone, say, late at night?
What happens?
When active, the pain body invades the mind. It doesn't use its own voice, it uses yours. It injects a torrent of negative thought. Suddenly, your thinking is deeply negative, anxious, angry, or self-pitying.
So if you are alone, the pain body feeds directly on these thoughts.
It cannot feed on happy, positive, or present thoughts. Those are indigestible to it because the frequency is wrong.
So a wave of emotion, anxiety, anger, a dark mood invades the mind. And the subsequent negative thoughts about yourself, your life, the past, or the future become the energy that sustains the cycle.
The thought justifies the feeling, and the feeling justifies the thought. It's a self-perpetuating system.
But if there are other people around, especially in intimate relationships, the pain body shifts its strategy entirely. It feeds on drama.
Yes. The source calls intimate relationships the pain body's favorite territory.
Why is that?
Pain bodies love intimate relationships and families because they attempt to provoke others, to intentionally push their buttons, and feed on the mutual negative emotional reactions that follow.
So the pain body of person A hooks the pain body of person B, and they both become momentarily possessed, creating a destructive feedback loop of shared negative energy.
Yes, and the source even notes that sometimes couples are drawn to each other precisely because their respective pain bodies complement each other, creating a high-drama dynamic, often mistaken for passion.
This concept of carrying the emotional past is beautifully encapsulated by the anecdote of the two Zen monks, Tanzen and Aikido.
It's a perfect illustration of emotional baggage. The monks encountered a young woman trying to cross a muddy road. Tanzen, without hesitation or judgment, immediately picked her up and carried her across.
Letting go of the event entirely the moment he put her down.
But 5 hours later, Aikido couldn't contain his moral outrage. He criticized Tanzen for touching the girl, saying, "Why did you carry that girl across the road? We monks are not supposed to do things like that."
And Tanzen's response cuts right to the heart of the pain body.
"I put the girl down hours ago. Are you still carrying her?"
Wow.
Aikido had carried the event, his judgment, his fear, and his resentment internally for 5 hours. This illustrates the burden of emotional thinking, or karma, the inability or unwillingness of the mind to let go of the past.
So most people live like Aikido.
Accumulating this unnecessary mental and emotional baggage with every perceived slight or moral judgment.
The comparison to animal behavior, the duck with a human mind, is equally illuminating in its simplicity.
When two ducks fight, they flap their wings vigorously immediately afterward to release the surplus energy that was generated by the conflict. Then, they simply float on peacefully.
They let go instantly. They don't have the mental capacity to sustain the conflict.
But if that duck had a human mind,
It would sustain the conflict by incessant story-making.
he thinks he owns this pond. I'll never trust him again. I need to plan my revenge.
The body continues to generate energy in response to those thoughts, feeding the pain body long after the external event is over.
So we are a species that has lost its way, forgetting the simple lesson of the duck.
Which is, flap your wings. Which means, let go of the mental story and return your full attention to the present moment.
So if the pain body is this pervasive, semi-autonomous force, how do we begin the process of healing it? How do we stop feeding the monster? The beginning of freedom lies in the realization that you have a pain body. This realization is crucial because it creates a separation.
It's not you, it's a collective dysfunction operating through you.
Precisely. The key action, once you recognize it, is to stay present and alert when it activates, to consciously put attention on the negative emotion without resisting it.
Walk me through that internal experience. If I feel a wave of anxiety or anger rising, what does it mean to put attention on it without resisting?
It means treating the emotion as a pure energy field, a sensation in your body, rather than immediately translating it into a negative story.
So you feel the restlessness, the heat, the tightness.
But you refuse to let your mind attach to the narrative. This feeling means my life is terrible, or I must confront that person. That conscious presence breaks the identification link.
Because when I don't identify with the pain body, when I recognize it as the pain body rather than my pain, it can no longer control my thinking.
Exactly. And without control over your thinking, it loses the energy it needs to renew itself. The energy that was trapped and frozen in that old negative emotion is then transmuted by the light of your awareness into presence itself.
So it's a spiritual alchemy. The pain body becomes fuel for consciousness.
Yes, and this sounds almost paradoxical. The pain, which felt like the biggest obstacle, becomes the source of growth.
It often is.
The pain body, especially a very dense one, often becomes the awakener, forcing a person into a state of presence when life becomes so unbearable they cannot live with their unhappy, thought-driven self any longer.
So the acute emotional pain forces them to disidentify from the story.
and realize they are the knowing, the awareness, not the known content of the mind.
Moving from the darkness of the ego and the pain body, we enter the realm of pure awareness, or being. Our source material points out that Western philosophy made a critical error right at the start of the modern age.
A huge error that has profoundly influenced our society's dysfunction.
Yes.
The 17th century philosopher René Descartes famously asserted, "I think, therefore I am,"
He made identity, the I am, synonymous with thinking.
finding the fact that he was always thinking to be beyond doubt. The source argues this was not the ultimate truth. It was the root of the egoic paradigm, enshrining the mental stream as the core identity of humanity.
And it took nearly 300 years for Jean-Paul Sartre to realize the profound implication of consciousness that had been missed.
Which was, the consciousness that says I am is not the consciousness that thinks.
That is a staggering realization.
It fundamentally separates thinking from awareness. When you are aware that you are thinking, when you observe your thought stream, that awareness is a different dimension of consciousness entirely.
Right. If you were nothing but thought, you wouldn't even know you were thinking.
You'd be a character lost inside a dream, incapable of observing the dream itself. The consciousness that says I am is the dimension of awareness, separate and prior to the mental stream, observing the thoughts rise and fall.
And that awareness is the formless dimension, yet the source suggests it communicates itself to us, surprisingly, through certain forms in the natural world.
Yes, which it calls formless messengers. Flowers, crystals, precious stones, and birds hold a special significance for the human spirit because of their ethereal quality and purity of form.
So their form obscures the indwelling spirit to a lesser degree than other, denser forms.
They are like messengers from another realm, a bridge between the world of physical forms and the formless essence that gives them life.
Like Jesus telling us to contemplate the lilies of the field, or the story of the Buddha's silent sermon.
Exactly. The Buddha famously gave a silent sermon by simply holding up a flower and gazing at it, which only the monk Mahakasyapa understood and smiled.
The origin of Zen.
It was. And this illustrates that simple, non-conceptual beauty can awaken us, however briefly, to the beauty and formless essence that is an essential part of our own innermost true nature.
And the key to using these messengers effectively is what the source calls perceiving without naming.
Right. The ego is maintained by the compulsive habit of instantly naming, interpreting, labeling, and judging every perception. We see a bird and we immediately think, that's a sparrow. Sparrows are common. It's sitting on my fence. I need to paint that fence.
So to stop that labeling, even for a few seconds,
To look at a flower, a crystal, or a bird without mentally articulating what it is creates inner space.
and what does that inner space feel like when the naming stops?
The world instantly regains its newness, its freshness. You stop covering up the world with your mind's opinions and interpretations, and you encounter things directly, without the filter of memory or judgment.
This is the artist's mind. Like Van Gogh, who looked and looked and looked at an ordinary chair until he sensed its very beingness.
He wasn't seeing a functional object. He was sensing its miraculous existence.
And this realization of inner space connects us back to our physical structure. The source notes the vastness within, that the physical body, which feels so solid, is actually 99.99% empty space.
Our body is a microcosm of outer space. When you shift attention from the dense external form to the feeling of aliveness inside it, that inner body reveals itself as essentially formless, intensely alive energy.
The bridge between the limited physical form and infinite being.
And the source gives us a primary accessible tool for creating this inner space and generating consciousness. Breath awareness.
It is the ultimate anchor.
Because breath has no form, it forces attention away from compulsive thinking. The sources remind us that the word for breath in Sanskrit, Atman, is often equated with the indwelling divine spirit.
So how do we use it to break the egoic loop?
One conscious breath is enough to make a gap where before there was an uninterrupted succession of thoughts. When you're conscious of your breath, when you feel the air moving in and out, the abdomen rising and falling, you are absolutely non-negotiably present.
Conscious breathing stops the mind because the mind cannot operate when your attention is fully invested in the present moment sensation.
You are not falling below thought into unconsciousness. You are rising above it into a state of full alertness.
This brings us to the crucial distinction between clock time and psychological time. We need clock time for practical functions, making appointments, building bridges. That's necessary for life and form.
But psychological time, The ego's endless, compulsive preoccupation with the past, which forms identity, and the future, which promises fulfillment. That is the problem.
The past becomes a burden of resentment and regret. The future becomes a promise that the present is lacking.
And the source makes a direct, powerful claim. The elimination of psychological time is the elimination of the ego.
Because the ego cannot survive outside of psychological time.
It can't. Time is the horizontal dimension of life, the surface layer of reality. The vertical dimension of depth, the spiritual dimension, is accessed only through the portal of the present moment, the now.
If you look closely, you never find direct evidence of time itself. You only ever experience the present moment or what happens in it.
Everything else is memory or anticipation.
I see the connection now to our earlier discussion about suffering. Compulsive behaviors and addictions, smoking, drama, overstimulation, are often desperate substitutes for the natural state of well-being that exists when we are connected to the aliveness of being.
To be unable to feel the life that animates the body, the life that you fundamentally are, is the greatest deprivation. People look for substitutes to cover up that continuous background unease, chasing thrills, loud stimulation, constant busyness, or creating drama in relationships.
And the addiction acts as a quasi-entity that takes over the mind, justifying the compulsive behavior.
By generating awareness, using conscious breath, and observing the urge as an energy field without acting on it, the link is broken, and the underlying lack of connection to being is addressed.
The ultimate test and application of presence is how we interact with the world and what we choose to do. The source material offers what it calls the secret of peace.
And the secret is found in dismantling the ego's story. Unhappiness is created by believing thoughts that tell the narrative, why I cannot be at peace now.
The ego will always argue that something needs to happen first, or that something from the past should not have happened.
All these are unexamined thoughts confused with reality.
The simple but profound shift, then, is making peace with the present moment by recognizing that the present moment is always already the case and therefore inevitable. It is what is.
The moment you align yourself with the inevitable isness of the present moment, inner resistance is gone.
This is where we see the equations simplify. Emotion plus an unhappy story equals unhappiness.
And when the unhappy story is dropped, when you simply accept the sensation without the mental interpretation, the suffering ends. The emotion may remain, but the suffering vanishes.
This is what the great spiritual teacher J. Krishnamurti meant when he revealed his secret. I don't mind what happens.
That phrase implies absolute inner alignment, total non-resistance, and non-judgment towards the form the moment takes. It is the ultimate freedom.
Meaning that your internal state is no longer conditional on external events. The example of Zen Master Hakuin is astonishing in its demonstration of this non-resistance in action.
It's perhaps the purest demonstration. Hakuin was falsely accused of fathering a child by a neighbor's daughter, which led to scandal, ridicule, and the complete loss of his reputation.
And his only immediate total response was,
Is that so?
he didn't argue, he didn't defend himself, he simply accepted the child and lovingly cared for it, even while his reputation was destroyed.
He refused to become a participant in the human drama of reaction. The event was not personalized. He allowed the form of the moment to be exactly as it was.
And then a year later, when the real father confessed and the parents apologized and returned to take the baby back, his only response was again.
Is that so?
That response twice shows the depth of his detachment. He allows the form of the moment, whether good news or bad news, falsehood or truth, to simply be.
And the profound teaching is that the world determines your happiness or unhappiness only if you resist what happens. Hakuin's total acceptance meant the world could not touch his core state of being.
And that decision to make the present moment your friend changes your entire reality.
While the ego, conversely, can never be in alignment with the present moment because its very nature compels it to ignore, resist, or devalue the now in favor of the past or the future.
So the ego treats the present moment in three dysfunctional ways: as a means to an end, as an obstacle, or, at worst, as an enemy.
Right. When you hate what you are doing, or you argue with what is, you are treating life as an enemy, and life reflects that hostility back to you, often in the form of stress, accidents, or further opposition.
This brings us to the concept of awakened doing. The source is clear. The primary purpose of life is not what you do, but what you are.
Your state of consciousness while doing it. Doing must flow from one of the three modalities of awakened action.
And these three modalities, acceptance, enjoyment, and enthusiasm, represent the only three vibrational frequencies of consciousness that are truly aligned with being.
And if you are not in one of these three states while performing an activity, you are contributing to suffering for yourself and others.
This applies to every action, from doing dishes to managing a company.
Every single one.
Let's break those down. First, acceptance.
This is for tasks you cannot change, but don't actively hate, like a stressful commute, doing your taxes, a necessary chore that is boring but unavoidable.
So what do?
You bring an alert, alive stillness into the background of the activity. You are aligned with the isness of the moment, accepting that this moment is required. That presence flows into and transforms what you do.
It eliminates the inner resistance that turns a chore into a battle.
Yes. Second is enjoyment.
And this is when the activity itself is fulfilling, not merely a means to an end.
Crucially, it isn't the outward action you enjoy, it's the dynamic aspect of the joy of being flowing into the action. If you feel your life lacks significance, it's because you haven't brought this dimension of consciousness, this sense of full engagement into what you do.
Enjoyment connects you with the creative power behind all creation.
And finally, enthusiasm. This is where the energy gets really high and purposeful.
Enthusiasm is deep enjoyment, plus the added element of a goal or a vision that you work toward.
It adds a dynamic, future-oriented vector to enjoyment, making you feel like an arrow moving toward the target while simultaneously enjoying the present journey of flight.
And the source makes a crucial distinction here. Enthusiasm must never be confused with stress or egoic drive.
Stress is the energy of egoic wanting the goal, more than enjoying the present journey, using the now as a means to an end. Stress is toxic to the body.
It diminishes the quality and effectiveness of what you do and cuts you off from the universe's creative power.
Enthusiasm, whose root on theos means possessed by a god, has a high, clear energy frequency. It never opposes, never creates conflict. It gives out of its own abundance.
Unlike the ego, which always tries to take or grasp. So if I'm building a business plan with enthusiasm, I am enjoying the creative process, and the energy is flowing freely.
But if you're doing it with stress, you're constantly worried about the outcome, deadlines, and competition, using fear as your fuel.
One is fueled by being, the other by the future-oriented ego.
And the vision or goal that fuels enthusiasm must itself be dynamic, not static.
What's the difference between a dynamic and a static goal?
Static goals, owning a mansion, becoming a millionaire, achieving a certain physical status, are inflated images of self that empower the ego, but they don't empower you.
They are finite points in the future that, when reached, result in a temporary drop in consciousness.
Dynamic goals, however, like creating a product that fundamentally simplifies communication or inspiring countless people with your writing, are activities through which energy flows from the formless source for the benefit of all.
So the goal is already a reality within you on the level of mind and feeling.
That is a fundamental spiritual law.
Yeah.
You cannot manifest what you want. You can only manifest what you already have as an inner state. If your inner state is lack, you will manifest lack.
If your inner state is abundance, you manifest abundance.
And this entire journey leads us inevitably to facing our limitations, whether through old age, illness, or personal tragedy.
The source calls this the return movement, the dissolution of form. Our physical, mental, or social form begins to contract or dissolve.
And the ego reacts to this contraction with intense anxiety, anger, or depression because its identity is threatened. However, the return movement carries great potential for spiritual awakening.
For those who can surrender to what is, who can accept the inevitable fading of form, it is an opening into spirit.
Limitation becomes liberation.
The ultimate illustration of this surrender is the famous theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, paralyzed by motor neuron disease.
When the source observed him in the early stages of his illness, he noted that there was no trace of unhappiness in Hawking's eyes. He had relinquished resistance and was living in surrender to his catastrophic physical limitation.
And years later, still alive and celebrated, Hawking commented upon his life, saying,
Who could have wished for more? His limitation, the dissolution of his physical form, had become a pathway into profound spiritual depth. What is lost on the level of form is gained on the level of essence.
That acceptance of limitation, that surrender, makes the fading form transparent to the light of consciousness.
So, to synthesize our deep dive, we trace the cause of collective and individual suffering back to the ego, which is merely the mind's total identification with form, thoughts, possessions, and roles.
Right.
We understood the nature of suffering through the pain body, a semi-autonomous energy form that compulsively feeds on negative emotion and drama.
And the solution lies in shifting identity from the content of the mind to the pure awareness behind it, using the portal of presence and making profound peace with the present moment. The key takeaways for you as the learner are clear. First, the ego isn't personal. It's a collective dysfunction, and you are the awareness that notices it, not the dysfunction itself. Second, awareness is the greatest agent for change, dissolving the ego's power by refusing to react and refusing to personalize the unconsciousness in others. Third, the secret to true peace and success, the highest vibrational state, is found in that phrase, I don't mind what happens.
And let's end with a final provocative thought, one that connects back to the theme of inner alignment and external reality, the profound spiritual law we touched upon earlier. The sources suggest that abundance comes only to those who already have it.
It sounds fundamentally unfair, like the world is rigged to favor the rich. But you clarified this is a universal law concerning inner states.
Precisely. Both abundance and scarcity are inner states that then manifest as your external reality. If the thought of whether lack of money, love, or appreciation has become a fixed part of who you think you are, your reality will constantly reflect that internal scarcity back to you.
The world cannot give you what you do not already possess on the level of inner feeling.
Therefore, you must acknowledge the good that is already in your life right now as the foundation for all abundance, rather than constantly focusing on what is missing. It shifts the energy from wanting to having.
So the ultimate question for you to mull over as you step away from this deep dive is this. Whatever you think the world is withholding from you, praise, appreciation, assistance, or love, are you withholding it first?
The action of giving determines the inflow. Try acting as if you already have that abundance. Allow that energy to flow out into the world and watch your reality respond to your state of being.
A profound point to reflect on, much like the final wisdom of the Zen saying, the snow falls, each flake in its appropriate place.
Be aware and be present.
Until next time, keep observing the voice in your head.